I'm Mark Britz. I work with the Learning Guild. I'll repeat that, the Learning Guild now, if you hadn't heard of our name change. And I am joined today by Mike Taylor. We're going to get into it pretty quick with our discussions about space learning and all the work he's done with it, what he knows about it, the tools he uses. But real quick, the chat today, during the course of this 30 minutes, hour, however long we want to talk, I'm just really curious, how many people in the chat, just tell me, how many people here watched the recorded session with Mike before coming to this conversation today? I did. Judy did. Yeah, 2 days ago. Excellent. It's okay if you didn't. I get it. We're all busy.
You still got 4 minutes to do it.
Shane, just go. We'll wait. We'll wait, Shane. Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, that's fine. And after you get done, you might want to go revisit it because you'll get more of the details of what some of the stuff Mike's going to talk about. The other thing to remember real quick, like I said, Bianca is working the back room, so to speak, of the chat. If you have a question, post it there. And then she's going to ping me and I'll feed Mike so Mike can just continue to talk about what he wants to share with us today about space learning. So, hey, Mike, just, it's really casual, but I do want to turn it over to you real quick just to kind of introduce yourself to folks, some of those folks who did see you before or did not. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Mike Taylor. I'm here in not quite so sunny Columbus, Ohio today, hoping all the technology and the weather doesn't put the electricity out and all those good things. Work for a consulting company here called Change for Growth. So I've been pretty fortunate to work over my career, kind of anything and everything that sort of even comes in the neighborhood of learning and training. I've probably touched it at some point. So excited to talk to everybody here and spend some time together. This is definitely the highlight of my week this week.
Well, good. That's nice to hear. So we're going to have questions in the chat, but I want to get started. I got my own 10 questions after.
I'm scared. I'm a little bit scared.
No, but I mean, I'm familiar with space learning. You talk about your recorded session, your session that you did for us in the past. You talk a little bit about Ebbinghaus. You talk about Will Thalheimer and his in this space. But I think for everybody here, just to kind of level set a little bit, when we talk space learning, we're really talking space training, or do you see it broader than that when we talk about it?
Well, so I think there's a whole conversation that could fill an entire day of training versus learning. So I think, what Will and the research and stuff, it's based on what I would consider to be learning. Mm-hmm. So the key there is, like a lot of things, whether it's an e-learning course or space learning, there's a lot of context you can use that in. It's the interactivity is happening sort of inside your head and, not just necessarily in your, next button finger or some other sort of ways. And so it's really pretty straightforward, and it's fascinating science that, when you are able to space out learning experiences, and particularly if you can couple that with retrieval. So mm-hmm. There's two ways you can do the spacing, right? I could just represent you a similar same topic a second time, which is beneficial, but I think there's some additional benefit if I prompt you to retrieve that. And so there's kind of a combination of a couple of things there that can be in play is the spacing itself and then the actual retrieval practice.
Yeah. So with that, though, I am curious about that. When we talk space learning, I mean, there's a lot of people who will be more formulatic with it, I guess, where it'll be like, oh, every 2 days you should do this, and and all that. I ask you, I mean, there's got to be nuance to this in terms of, tell me.
Absolutely. And if you read Will's report, which if you haven't, I highly recommend that because it's really fantastic. He's done an amazing job. He's taken, I don't know how many dozens of research studies and combined them into a summary that's really quite helpful. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about in his report is there is no one learning curve because there's a lot of factors that go into it, just as with any learning, right? So your modality and the instructional design and the delivery channel, like all of those are factors. The topic itself is some, inherently more or less difficult to remember than others. So there's not a forgetting curve. It's unique for every scenario, every situation. And so that's, I think, one really important thing. I don't know that anybody could honestly say give you a recipe. So repeat it once after 2 days. There's some nice rule of thumbs, which I kind of talked about and you saw in the recording if you mentioned that. So I think, rule of thumb is a good place to start. And then like everything else, you need to sort of start somewhere and then be informed and, evolve over time to sort of fine tune that.
So that's a really good point you just made there about starting somewhere, because Karen in the chat, I just saw, she said, we finally have the permission and the means to do spaced learning. I want to start with that first thing about permission. So Karen, I'm not directing this to you, but it did trigger for me to ask Mike a little quick, like, how do you get started in this conversation? I think a lot of organizations have a mindset about L&D and the production of courses and materials, but spaced learning is much more about a program approach. So what's your thoughts?
Yeah, so obviously every organization and every company is unique. I'll just start off with, I would always try to ask forgiveness over permission. That's just probably, I don't know, that's maybe my nature, a little bit stubborn, a little bit, I don't know, curmudgeonly now as I get up here a little bit. But, I think that just do something and not to take advantage of people or not in a negative way, but, move forward, trying new things. And I think part of that is maybe educating your supervisors or educating your superiors or VPs or wherever that falls. I think, one of the views of our profession is people don't really know what there's this really broad, wide spectrum of options that we can use. But I think 99% of the people only know what they've experienced. And so that's typically a classroom or an e-learning course, which is, if you think about it, maybe most of what we do, but it's really a small subsection of the tools and the platforms and the options that we have available.
I mean, we refer to it here in this conversation as spaced learning, and sometimes I think we're more successful when we mask things. If we talk learning, sometimes in organizations, the eyes start to glaze over by executives sometimes. I'm just curious too, I'll throw this in the chat too, is for anybody who's experienced spaced learning, how have you introduced it? Do you call it spaced learning, or are you talking it more about, maybe it's tailored to being more about performance support and the ideas of bringing this in?
That prompts one, what you call it, your comment there, it sort of raises an important thing, because I think it does matter what you call it. If we go in using all of our sort of learning nerd terms and all this sort of stuff, nobody outside of us cares, and half of us don't care, right? So if you can sort of put it in a plain English or something maybe more specific to highlight the benefits, right? So if you can say that, one of these campaigns is, people are going to learn better, or are going to sell more, or whatever it is, nobody cares if it's cognitive load or spaced learning. Like, nobody cares. It's just, how does it benefit what we're trying to get to? What are our goals and stuff like that? So I think it really is important. Back to the earlier question about how do you get permission. One of the things that I learned, I had a director, we were trying to get something silly like get YouTube access through the firewall or something. And he's like, oh, no big deal. We'll just call it a pilot. You can do anything if you call it a pilot, right? And so I've kind of latched onto that and used that a number of times, and it is amazing how, it's not 100%, but it's a pretty good batting average if you just call it a pilot or call it a test, and people are not as hesitant or defensive to try new things. I
like that. I think, you touch on like that conversation to have to get the permission. And then somebody in the chat, I'm going to have to look back here. I apologize. I just saw drip by here. By the way, use the word drip, which drip is a term too, right? It's
a drip campaign. That's it.
Well, somebody in here mentioned about using it, I saw as a place to start. So there's a conversation to start, and then it looks like they alluded to the fact it's useful in onboarding. It's something that they've applied there. Have you seen it used there, or do you know of other use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. It's onboarding is a fantastic application for this. So you think about the massive amount of stuff that you get thrown at you when you're onboarding. I went through this recently, so not maybe about a year ago, I went through this, and there's just stuff that's coming left and right, and it's not always cohesive, and there's not really a central place to find things. And then months later, something would come up, I'd have a question. Oh, well, that was in your onboarding. It's like, well, it might as well not have been, because I don't remember what it was or where it was, because it's just too much. So maybe it's not purely a spaced learning thing from, you know, the scientific research kind of thing, but being able to space things out over time. Don't give me something if, you know, if I'm not eligible for a plan for 6 months, well, don't give it to me on day one because I can't do anything with it. Give it to me 6 months later when I can do something with it. And you know, a lot of these tools that we talk about, like you can set up programs that are automated so that, you know, as somebody who's administering this content distribution, you know, you can put them in the program and you don't have to set a calendar reminder to send it 6 months. It's just automatically dripped, as you know, as that's one of the terms. And so a little bit of small investment up front can really save you loads and loads of time and effort and forgetting and all that stuff, you know, for yourself personally, in addition to the benefits to the people that are receiving it.
So when I try to picture spaced learning, a drip campaign, what content forms have you seen leveraged? What types of things do you see? You know, it's not taking a course or a workshop and then chunking it out and dumping it on somebody in pieces for 6 months.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the things we should think about?
Yeah, that's a really great point. And it's really pretty simple. And it's actually, spaced learning is not separating a course into pieces. It's the repeating. So I'm going to give you a learning point now, and then at some point in the future, I'm going to give you another iteration of the same learning point. It doesn't have to be identical, but it's the same learning point. There are all kinds of ways that you can do this. Exonify does this. There's EdApp is a platform that does this. So there are learning systems that have this sort of built in. The example that I like to use that is easy and you could get started with free are email marketing tools.
Okay.
So if you wanted to combine, the other example that I come back to a lot are compliance courses. So just think if I could take our annual compliance course, we can still take it, right? We're going to check our box, we're still going to take it. But if we really truly want that to have an impact and people to remember, then why don't we pull pieces out of that and drip it out across the year so that each of those learning points, we're going to get that repetition. And, you know, repetition and exposure is going to lead to memory, and hopefully, you know, if there's any action involved, we're going to see better results in that sense as well.
So I have a ton more questions. Well, I got like 5 more, to be honest with you. But I'm looking and seeing that a couple questions came up I want to throw by you. Bhakti, who I know well, she does some work in management. She's asking, would you call a MOOC spaced learning?
Well, I think most of the MOOCs I have seen, I wouldn't. But that's not to say that you couldn't construct one in a way, you know, based on your structure and your prompts and how you're designing that. So I think it could be. I think virtually any medium could potentially be, but it just is how you design it and, you know, how are you going to structure things. Obviously, some have more structure than others.
Yeah, yeah, good. Shane asked, any advice for building spaced learning around, say, a multi-day conference? And he goes on to say, I don't want to hit them with everything 2 days later, but I'm worried about completing spaced learning for one content topic before beginning another. Yeah,
so two things there. The first, I've actually used the email marketing tools as a follow-up to, say, a conference session. So what I've done is I've pulled out maybe the 4 or 5 main points that I wanted people to remember, and I've made it kind of an autoresponder email course, for lack of a better word. It's not really a course. And then the nice thing about that is they sign up once. You know, you could have, you know, one each day, one every other day, whatever that structure is. It's super easy to set up. You could even repeat it more than once, right? So in the article that I referred to in the session, you know, you could do one 2 days after, 2 weeks after, 2 months after. That's kind of a good rule of thumb for repetition. And that's super easy to set up, and something like that might work really well. The other kind of thing that comes up in that question is there's actually some learning science around this concept called interleaving. So it's actually better to mix your topics and study multiple topics interleaved with each other, the science behind that says actually the learning is better at that than if you batch them together.
So is it because there's a relationship between the content? Is that how this?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It seems to be, and I would defer to somebody much more informed than myself, like Will or somebody on this. But my understanding is it doesn't have to be related, and it's just the switching and mixing of topics. So if you're looking for a little bit on that, look up the interleaving research, and Will's got some of that too.
Cool. Another question for you. Kristen asked, how do you work with SMEs to get them to prioritize performance goals, learning content that needs to be repeated?
This is the age-old question, right? Anybody who's ever worked in our field is working with SMEs. I think, I don't know. I'd be open to hear anybody others. I don't know that I have any super secrets. Again, other than kind of going back to, plain English, talking in terms of results, languages that they understand. Like if there are ways that we can say, hey, we can do things more efficiently or more effectively, like that's always a good approach, I think. Trying to, and again, it's also an educational thing too, because SMEs are just like stakeholders, and usually they only know what they've seen or what they've experienced. So there's some degree of an educational part on us to show them options.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it may drive us crazy, and if you may feel like you say it a million times. But I think that's part of our responsibility is, these are the options. Here are the considerations. Another thing that works really well, and this is something that I've stolen along the years, is the improv trick, right? When somebody asks you a question, if you say no, it kind of ends everything and makes things confrontational. Whereas if you say, yes, I could build you that e-learning compliance course, and would you also be interested in a better, cheaper, more efficient way to do it? So, if you say yes and instead of no but, it's a very different feeling, and it seems like such a small thing, but I've used that, and it's been pretty successful for me in a lot of places.
Mike Taylor's Jedi mind tricks. That's what he's...
And it's not mine. Like I think I read it in a book. There's a book called Yes and. It was an improv person. So, I'm just stealing what works from others, or borrowing it. Stealing sounds kind of bad.
Fair enough. Well, steal, apply, and learn, and share. I love it. So, a couple things I was thinking about as you were talking, and especially from the questions, I was looking at Shane's in particular about event-based, where this all starts. Is how do you know, like, the best way to determine how much to be trickling in after an event? Not necessarily the frequency of the space, but how much of that content should be coming out periodically?
I don't think that I know. Like I can't look and tell you it's 18%, or I can't.
Yeah.
I can't do that. Again, it's sort of you as the designer, you as the person who's kind of organizing that. You can look at all the research, and you can see have conversations, what's working for other people. I think ultimately, you're giving your best guess. One of the things that I pointed to in one of the articles from the session was, the good thing is the reminders or the boosters, or whatever he called it in the article, they don't have to be big and involved. Okay. So he cites a particular study in there where he gave, I think, a 5-second repetitive booster, and 5 minutes, and then one in the middle, and the 5-second ones were just as effective as the 5-minute ones. So that's, I think, speaks to the power of the repetitive part of it, and it doesn't have to be a big, long, involved production for those repetitions.
So again, I'm picturing in my mind what that spaced learning piece would be. Are we talking in terms of things like, it could be audio, it could be text-based, it could be video? What have you seen that's been unique or really effective?
Yeah, and that's a great point and a great question, and that's the beauty of this, is it could be all of those. It could be any of those. So it could be just a text email. It could be a text message, right? Like that's an easy thing to build into a kind of a text-based learning campaign.
Mhm.
Could be video, could be an interactive piece, right? So it could be super simple from a simple email reminder or text reminder all the way up to some really cool kind of interactive digital thing. And so, that's the nice thing is it goes both ways, right? Like we could do anything, which is plus and minus because you got to sort of pick and choose. But I think that's the beauty of it is you're not really limited by formats or delivery channels.
Right, right. So the question I think people would have, especially in an organization with this, again, an organization who might look at learning traditionally and say, no, I want a course. And then you use your Jedi mind trick and get that. But I think if they go from that, the question that probably might arise is the old ROI. How do I measure success, of spaced learning program as being effective? You've done this. How do I know it's making a difference?
Well, two things. I would say, A, how do you know you're getting it now is the first question.
Yeah.
Second part of that is I would say that let's just use an email platform just for simplicity because those are quick and easy and you could set those up. So assuming the content is already exists somewhere, it is much cheaper. It's a lot faster to get spun up and live to do sort of maybe an email type campaign course than it is to build an e-learning course, get it tested, get it on the LMS, wherever it's going to live, all of the production. So I think it's more agile, it's cheaper. It's, when you come to it, if you think you build in the right repetition, it's going to be more effective. And I think if you use that kind of language and start to sort of set light bulbs off of what's potential, like there's not any, or hopefully not very many directors and VPs and stakeholders who, when you show them that there's a better, cheaper way, who wouldn't probably, leap at that.
Right, right. Do you have you pointed people to examples out there that others have done that say, here's an example in onboarding, here's sales training, here's.
Yeah, there are some. There was, I'm trying to remember, maybe Judy may know some. I know she's done a couple things around here. Sarah Mercier has done a bunch of examples in some of her sessions. There's a big European, I can't remember the name, I think it was a bank, a financial institution. So there's a bunch of stuff out there. They did really a true sort of campaign where everything from, flyers and table tents and the lunch tables in the cafeteria to, multimedia online stuff. They had a whole bunch of elements in their campaign. There's not, there's not as many as you'll see e-learning courses, maybe coming out your ears. You won't see too many of these. So, what people have done, it just doesn't lend itself as easy to being shared yet, or, maybe it just hasn't been done that much. I know Carl's here in the chat room. He and I have worked on some things around onboarding.
Okay.
So one of the things, the other things that we haven't really gotten to yet, but it's a really big benefit, is how you can kind of serve up dynamic content to unique groups. So the example would be back to onboarding again. And let's say that we're in a health system and we have multiple locations and we have multiple different types of staff. So doctors, nurses, support staff. And if you start to sort of add that up across, each of the roles, each of the locations, a lot of that information is going to be irrelevant for the rest. And so you can build these out so that only the right people are getting the appropriate information. And, that's automated. So it handles that sort of dynamic distribution of content. And that's a really big benefit as well.
So and maybe it's a good segue in terms of some of the technologies that we could be leveraging. You talk about them in the recorded session. I was thinking about this at the Guild itself. I mean, we use Yammer at the Guild. We use Slack at the Guild. We've got Teams at the Guild. We've got plenty of these, and I'm sure people here are also in that same position. So maybe you'd be able to share a few examples of what people could be leveraging.
Yeah, I've actually got that example here handy. So let me kind of talk a little bit about that, and we'll try to keep an eye on things. If you can help me call out anything that people might raise as we go through here.
Yep.
Have you got my screen here now?
I see it.
Okay, so this is the onboarding example that we're talking about. For the email platforms, this is using one called MailerLite, which is one of my favorites. Most of them work about the same way. One of the features they'll give you is sort of a landing page or some sort of a subscription form so you can get people into your program. You could also connect this on the back end, you know, with data and upload spreadsheets and connect, you know, other data sources and stuff. But this is kind of a pretty straightforward example. So the context here would be, I just got hired and maybe I'm coming into my orientation and I want people to sign up to be part of this ongoing kind of drip campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the nice things that we can do is, you know, you always have a name and email type thing, but we can also put some additional fields here and kind of put some metadata around and segment our audience. So one of the things we did here was around role. So nurse versus clinical versus, you know, some other options that they had. And then also locations. So the combination of those two things are going to feed them unique pieces of content. And I'm trying to remember which one I built out here for this demo, so we'll see. But so I'm going to let them identify to make sure they get the right stuff. And that's all going to feed into, and here's I'm going to go into the back end here. And here is our onboarding. Let's see if we can get the visual view. All right, so this is an automated workflow. And the one thing I like about MailerLite when you start to build these things out is it gives you this really nice visual kind of flow chart. Here we go. And this is really helpful to keep track of what messages are going to whom. So you can see up here, there's the three pieces. There's always a trigger. What's going to trigger the next piece of content?
Mm-hmm.
The original trigger is, okay, you joined the group, you signed up. And we can build these out so that there is a delay, so things can go immediately with no delay. I can send them, you know, 1 hour later, 1 day later, 1 month. So any of those kind of sequencing you can do. And so in this particular setup, when a subscriber joins, they get the initial welcome email. Now, everybody gets that, right? I don't have any branching yet right off the bat. So the second email in the sequence is going to be something related to their role. So is your role, if your role is this is like their home health care stuff. So if you're in that role, then you're going to get sent down a separate branch of content. And this has only got one choice here, but there could be multiples, right? Once they get the second email, now we're going to kind of take a look at what facility are you? Are you in Louisville? Are you in Lexington? So this is an example of a multiple branching. Mm-hmm. And so you'll see as we get to the bottom, you know, these are each unique emails based on exactly where their facility is because it's facility specific. Does that kind of generally make sense? Everybody have any questions about kind of how that is flowing and how it works?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this looks like it's time-based release. Can it be more dynamic where the content piece is, you're nodding your head, so I'm assuming you got a story to tell me. So that they complete something or they do something and then that triggers another set of actions.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic question, by the way.
Why, thank you.
So it can be time-based. It can also be action-based. So it could be, every platform is slightly different as what options are available, but it could be, hey, did this person click this link? Mm-hmm. You know, I've seen an example where the first email is, hey, we have 3 different tracks. Which one do you want? And then whichever link or button you click, then that action, that behavior-based, is what drives your content. Or it could be, hey, this person didn't open the email. I want to send maybe a follow-up nudge or a reminder. Mm-hmm. Or so there's behavior-based ones. They're mostly similar, but there's some unique differences between platforms. Let me see if I can. Let's find the right place to go in and mess with one of these. Let me save. Yes, I don't want to change the email. Fine. Save. Okay, there we go. I got stuck on that. Let me see if I can get another decision point in here. Where is it? Well, I'll mess around with that, but let me go back to another one. Any other questions while I'm kind of fiddling with this a bit?
I haven't seen it come through. A lot of thank yous for sharing this.
Yeah, and I want to go edit it. And I want to add a criteria here. You know, like a lot of things, the most important thing is map it out on paper and have the logic first up front. That's usually the hardest part. Then when you go to build it, it's relatively. Let me go in here. Let me see if I can get into one of these emails. I want to just show you here. Even if you don't get into this, this is my connection. I want to edit the email. There we go. Even if you don't get into this type of branching and stuff, there's still some benefits, even if you just send one-offs. So the editors in here, it's almost impossible to create ugly emails. So there's that. You can schedule these. So if you wanted to schedule them in conjunction with an event or a webinar or anything like that, you could schedule these in advance, or they could be repetitively scheduled. Here's what it looks like, and see, it's nice and clean. There's a lot of white space in here. Let me get back over where I can just get to an email and show you the interface here. I keep saying that it's easy, and it's really, really super easy. Even I can do it. All right, so let's say
a question to throw out to you while you're fishing around. Judy was asking in here about what considerations should we take into account when choosing one, such as, you know, email, SMS text,
Yeah, I think the most important consideration is where are your people already, right? Like, everybody has email, which is another nice thing. But if you're in an environment where, everybody is texting each other, or, it's kind of the traditional kind of audience analysis, and trying to avoid giving them kind of yet another place to go, because that's usually a recipe for challenges you don't need. But that's the good thing, for all the billions of people who are on Facebook and Twitter, like, more people have email than all of those. So you think about that. Everybody has email. Here's the editor. So pretty nice kind of web-based thing here. So if you just want to bring in new elements or get rid of things, you can just literally drag them in and place them. And then you can just replace their images with yours, replace their text with yours. So when I want to start editing things, here's my title, here's my body text, buttons, nice and clean and crisp. Different platforms are going to have different layouts and different templates. This one is one that I like. It's nice and clean, visually appealing. MailChimp is another one I've used a lot, which is got a very similar editing experience. You can embed, back to Mark's comment earlier about what type of comment. So you can embed a survey or a quiz or a video, or you can embed things into these. Again, some of them have unique capabilities versus others, but there's a lot that you can do with an email. I think email has kind of a negative connotation, but most people, when they're thinking of email, they're not thinking of this type of possibilities.
So Mike, as you walk through how these and show the drag and drop and the setup, one of the questions that came through from Kristen was, do you typically build everything out at the beginning, or do you, kind of prepare yourself to change course when you see, and based on the actions people are taking on that?
Yeah, so typically I would try to map things out in advance.
Yeah,
The other nice thing here, I've got a is that you get analytics out of this. So I'm flipping over to MailChimp now because it's got because I've got more data, and B, I just kind of want to show you something that's got data and kind of an example of the kind of things we can see. So because I now have analytics and I can see not only who's opening and who's not opening, for example, I could, if I send an email through MailChimp, I could see that, Mark Britz opened this 11 times or 0 or whatever it is. I can also see down to an individual level, if I want to drill down that more, I can see, what links are being clicked. Here's an example. So this was my email newsletter that I send every Friday from this morning. And so I can see that 35 people clicked Patty Shank's, the link to her article about asynchronous and synchronous modalities. And if I spent some more time in here, I could get right down to individual people to see what they clicked. So if I find that maybe there's a compliance thing and I want everybody to see the new policy and nobody's clicking that button or that link, okay, well then maybe it's not clear and I've got to adjust. So by having some visibility to what's happening with my links and my content, then you can start to tweak things like, okay, email number 3 in the sequence, nobody's going to see the policy. Is it clear? Do I want to revisit that? Maybe rewrite it, move it to the top, those type of things. So we're starting to get a little bit more insights and possibilities to see what's happening with our content. So that's one of the nice things about being able to get some of this type of data.
So besides texting and email, because Renee was asking, and rightfully so, like, there's email fatigue. People, get bombarded and buried.
Sure.
So what other avenues besides the text or email or other approaches to take with spaced learning?
Yeah, so the other tool that we talked about in the session was this tool called Sparks.
Okay.
And so this is one that I really like about this one, is that you can use multiple channels through the same tool. So in this case, it could be email, it could be SMS. There's a mobile app that you can use as an avenue. Uses Slack. You can connect it to Microsoft Teams. So that covers a pretty broad portion of most audiences, I would say. And then not only that is, it's really nice to be able to mix and match. So maybe the welcome email is the first one. They've got an example in here, and it's a fire safety. And so at some point, they schedule the SMS message to happen in the evening, and it tells you to check the batteries in your fire alarm at home. And so those different channels give you those kind of possibilities to reach people, not only in different channels, but different times and likely geographic locations, home versus work, that kind of thing.
Bhakti was asking too, she's saying, can you key in interactions? Are you talking about, Bhakti, are you talking about like connecting the interactions, like different ones? I'm not sure.
While we're looking at that, the other thing I want to call out here that's nice with that Sparks tool, right? Like they've got some XAPI connectivity, so you can send things to and from via XAPI. So one of the triggers could be, you completed a course or you took an action in a course, and then that XAPI statement could be the trigger that generates, a campaign. You can also, send an email to that person's manager, right? It doesn't always have to be the person, because, obviously managers have a big role to play in, what people are learning at work. This one's got a lot more potential for connecting these different parts. We've seen the channels, the XAPI, and then of course you can get reporting out of that as well. So there's lots of possibilities, with this option.
So to clarify Bhakti's question, she was more looking at, is there a way to leverage spaced learning to make it a little bit more interactive versus a one-way prompting system?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So we've done this, and I've seen some other people do it as well with texting. And so you can, in email, I mentioned the surveys, right? Like we can interact that way. You can embed web components. In texting, right? Like you can have links to items.
Mm-hmm.
There's a relatively new tool called, I think it's called Arist, that I've seen people doing some cool stuff with.
Yep.
Brian Dusablon did a big, I think it's about a
Touch-based
14 or,
gifts.
yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, it's, you know, I wouldn't say I would want everything via text that way, but I think as part of a larger program that it really makes a nice, you know, a nice change of pace and a nice option.
Mm-hmm. A comment, Karen just made a comment here about it seems like there's a lot of potential for a gamification element with space learning. Have you seen things like that practiced, Mike?
I have not seen it personally. I think there's some tools that maybe do some things with it. I mentioned EdApp has some of that. I don't know specifically if they've done things. I know they have both of those factors. I don't know specifically that they've merged them or how they've done that. I haven't personally done any gamification around space learning yet, but I'm sure it's doable, just based on, you know, the tools and the new options that are coming out. Yeah, Eris, there it is. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of competitors to Eris too, though, but yeah, you can definitely find.
Yeah, Carl makes a good point too. A lot of times the interactivity, you can be pretty creative with just some simple things and hyperlinks, and you know, it doesn't have to be a big, expensive, complex system.
Yeah.
So that's a good reminder. Carl's very good at that, by the way. He's pretty creative of hacking things together and using forms and, you know, sending it via different channels, and so, you know, don't always get stuck in just only looking at what your tool can do, but sort of look at, you know, simple hyperlinks can do a lot more than most people probably realize.
I was curious early on. I mean, we're talking the technical piece to this, but I was also curious of, you know, the duration of these programs, these campaigns, and you know, does there come a human element that says at a certain stage in this we can begin to either increase the spacing or fade it out completely? Does it come to a terminal point, or can it just dissipate?
Yeah, so the general theory of it is, as the more repetitions you get, the further out you can spread those. So you sort of I'm sure this is not the right scientific term, but the shelf life of that contact point,
right,
over time. So the first one's really short, the second one's a little bit longer, the third one's starting to extend. There's some charts on that kind of illustrate that point. And the rule of thumb is, try to remember I get this correct, the spacing should be equal to the duration you want that memory to be sustained. So if you want them to remember it for 6 months, then the spacing is 6 months. It's sort of like that. So these days, you know, things are changing so frequently.
Yeah.
You know, maybe it would have a shorter lifespan that may have had in the past.
Fair enough. Julie asked, do you have a list of popular tools and platforms besides the ones you've shown? Is that one of your resources, or?
Yeah, so the email ones, I have this list. The ones that I've shown in here, I think if you search for it, like I mentioned earlier, I think Exonify has a space learning element in it. EdApp has one in it. Will actually has one that's not been kept up to date on his website. So he's got a bigger list there of others.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so they're out there, and I don't know that there's anybody yet who has sort of pulled together a comprehensive, up-to-date list. And I would say that your logical approach is probably more important. I mean, you can build one of these. Actually, I think I have this article here because I thought you can do a mail merge. This guy, Amit, has built a mail merge with Gmail and Google Sheets.
Okay.
But it can customize. It's pretty slick, there's a video here. I'll put the link in the chat. But you can do that. People can unsubscribe themselves. You can tailor the messages. And so for free stuff, it's pretty powerful. The other thing that you can do that I referenced in this session is Zapier is a really great tool for connecting different types of apps. So for example, the example I used in the session was we used a survey for registration. And then instead of copying, pasting, or downloading or messing with all that data, we used a Zapier. I call them recipes. And so we took the survey data, automatically connected it through the API and Zapier to GoToWebinar, automatically created registrations. We also automatically sent the same data to MailChimp to enroll them in that campaign over there. So those are some ways you kind of work smarter and connect all these different apps pretty easily.
Sounds like if this, then that.
It's exactly that. It's exactly that, but kind of on steroids. And those kind of services are becoming popular now. There's automate.io, and there's a bunch of them. They're kind of coming out of the woodwork these days, which is a good thing.
So my question came through a little bit about considering the audience, and it references things like their learning preference, their communications. Obviously, it goes beyond that, the idea of just the role, but their context too, and how much that plays into this design.
Well, I think that's always a consideration, right, for everything that we do. I'm not sure if I got the key point of the question here, so I might ask you to come back to repeat. But one of the nice things about just about all of these are administratively they're really low overhead, so people can subscribe and unsubscribe themselves. Right. It doesn't require a person managing all of that stuff, so that's kind of another benefit. But I'll come back to you to make sure, see, I didn't miss a question in there.
No, I think it's just more the contextual side of it, and the depth of understanding. In this case, you're talking about a spaced learning campaign, possibly on a post event, and yet
could be pre.
Best those learners, to design the campaign to meet their particular need, possibly their communication, their ability to connect with that content. I would add into that context where what they're doing in their work, their availability.
Yeah, and I think that goes to the heart of most things that we do, right? Like I want to get the right stuff to the right people to the right time at the right place. All of those questions that the nice thing with this is, as we saw kind of in that branch onboarding example, right? Like I can let people identify, okay, I'm this role and I'm in this location, and that's going to guide them to the right information. I think ultimately, if you provide value to people, then you're doing your job, and that's our whole purpose for existence. So part of that is identifying, which people value which types of things. I just think there's a lot of nice options in this type of thing, from whether they're self-identifying, whether we're finding that out somewhere else, and the dynamic nature of this, where I don't have to send 20,000 people through a 60-minute e-learning course and only, a quarter of it is relevant.
Right.
It's nobody likes those, I don't think. And even the people that build them don't want to sit through them. And I think if you can kind of put that angle on your stakeholders, like, hey, 75% of this is wasted time and it's locked navigation and I can't test out. And it makes a lot of these things we're talking about seem that much more appealing, I think.
A couple more specific questions for you. I'm fielding from the chat. Thank you, Bianca, for feeding me these real quick. So Laura was asking, she works at a university, and they're having difficulty with retention for a lot of reasons, but she says the biggest one being the amount of content that they have to provide. And she goes on to ask, how would you suggest being able to use spaced learning with complex systems training?
Oh, gosh, I think it kind of really comes back to detecting like who needs what, right? Like, I don't know, I'm using the system. Maybe if I'm processing expense reports, don't put me on the same content distribution channel as somebody who's doing a procurement or something else, right? Like, so relevance and value, I think, whether it's space learning or anything else that we're doing,
Yep.
you know, I know everybody gets inundated with emails, but I would bet that all of us probably have some small number of people that I have a couple, 2 or 3 emails that every week when they come, like I'm waiting for them and I'm looking for them and I'm anticipating them because it's giving me value.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, the key, no matter what format, is trying to strike that value chord.
If you want to, Mike, can you end your screen sharing?
Oh, yep.
Back in this direction. Wesley asked you, can the lifespan question, this goes a little more technical, can the lifespan question be correlated with unsubscribe requests, like, or tickets, or to get me out of this?
Yeah, I think it could be. Obviously, if you're getting a lot of those, that, you know, something somewhere is not offering that value that we're talking about. So it's, you know, I've moved on to another job. This is no longer a relevant topic. You know, that system doesn't exist anymore if we're talking about system stuff. So yeah, I think that's another great point about sort of using some data and watching what's happening with subscribers and clicks and, you know, all that sort of stuff. That's a very great point. I think it could, for sure.
On the surface, it seems like some of the tools do a pretty good job of helping with the administrative tasks. So initially I thought, my God, this is a larger program. If you start with an event-based and you design and there's a lot to it, I feel like, oh my, do I need 3 people to do this? Or is it, you know, can it be managed pretty easily?
If you're doing it manually, I think it would pretty quickly be just untenable, right? Like because, you know, every time a new employee starts, you got to remember to do that. And then you got to, you know, what is the spacing? You got to remember to do that. So, you know, I think it's almost undoable unless you have some sort of technology assistance.
Right.
And, you know, fortunately, these are easy things that you can pilot and test out, and it doesn't take any technical skill.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, you don't need to know any code. You don't need to know XAPI or any kind of statements or anything like that. And so it's a really low barrier to entry. And, you know, you can try it and see what works, and, you know, call it a pilot. And
right. Well, you know, personally, I've done that myself in the past. Was, you know, I tried something with really low tech, which enabled me to have the conversations to get the tech that I needed to do the job. So you try it out really small and show the value, and then all of a sudden the doors seem to open up a little bit to get what you need. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, if you do something really well, you know, this is like the best case we all hope for, right? Like you do a pilot, small scale pilot really well, and people start hearing about it. Hey, can I get in that? Can I get in that? You know, and you know, spreading it organically, that's, you know, that's like the best thing ever.
It's gold. 2 more questions came in. I know we're getting close to the end of your time, so I appreciate you being here, Mike. So Dorothy asked, how do you view the integration of digital credentials or badging possibly with this approach? Kind of goes to that gamification a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're starting to get a little bit higher up the complexity scale here as we're talking about that, but it's totally doable. I mean, depending on how you're feeding data or information into these. So all of these could totally have this as an element to them. So, you know, I think in the badging, you know, my question would be, okay, how are we applying the repetition? You know, maybe part of the strategy is we're repeating things to help them get to that badge.
Right.
But, you know, I think that certainly that there's a place for that, and that could be done. It'd just be a matter of working outside of technical details.
Yeah, it seems like it would support the final outcome versus badging within the system itself.
Yeah, right.
The ultimate, you know, deeper understanding and proof. We're getting close here. One of the questions is, have you faced, or what are some of the pushbacks that people have to this approach in organizations, and you know, the criticisms, if you will?
Well, we've heard a couple of them, right? So, you know, it's different. It's not sort of traditional. People aren't familiar with it, so you're going to have some hesitation with that. You'll always hear everybody gets too much email already. Yeah. Like we've raised that point. You may have some IT friends who are, hey, you know, this isn't inside the firewall. You'll have probably some of that in some places more than others. You know, I don't personally see this as a threat. You know, we get emails from outside the firewall all the time. I don't really see, you know, this as a really strong point for those IT people to deny it. It'll happen. It's just that's the way it is. So some of those things are common and they're universal. And you know, I don't really see a whole lot of other pushbacks other than those are really elementary and not too tough to get around.
Yeah. I mean, there's still that mindset out there, like you said, I think early on, is like, it's different. You know, there's a lot of executive level people who have unfortunately bought into, we take this course, we check the box, we're done. And then you wonder, is it really about learning, or is it just getting this complete? This, you know, if we really want people, for example, to be compliant, then a steady drip of the behaviors and the activities we want people to engage in should be continually reminded of.
Well, and that might be another challenge too, is some people in some organizations may not want to admit that, hey, we're just actually checking the box.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen people say, you know, we're really here for one thing, but then their actions sort of tend to be evidence towards another. Yep. You know, we're just going to check the box. We're not going to do anything else. Well, it's okay. And that's okay if that's what you're doing. But if you're really trying to impact performance, you know, one and done's maybe not the best approach.
Ooh, right. Yeah. Karen referred to it as dump and run.
It feels like that sometimes.
You know, we got 2 minutes left. I'm going to give you one last question. It came in from Kristen. She said, have you seen this used successfully to drive participation in a learning community?
Yeah, I have. We did a project a couple of years ago now around digital marketing and using social for lead generation for nationwide insurance agents. So, you know, in your neighborhood, the neighborhood insurance nationwide guy or girl or gal or whatever the case may be. And we had a half-day workshop, but we had these types of spaced learnings that were repetitive, I think 6 weeks following. So we had 2 things. We had a MailChimp campaign that were reiterating the key points from the workshop. And then we also paired that up with some webinars so we could have some discussions and conversation. And it was pretty cool. There were a few people that they were kind of tend to be from the older demographic and people that had thought sort of they couldn't keep up in the new world with all the digital things. They felt like they were being left behind. And there were kind of a couple emotional folks who were pretty happy about, you know, this is not as hard as I thought it was. And, you know, they saw some pretty impressive results as far as taking the things they've always done in person, that Chamber of Commerce meetings and those type of things. Now they're moving them to places like LinkedIn and online and seeing that it's the same concepts, it's just in a new place. And so we saw some pretty good success around that type of stuff that we wouldn't have seen had we just showed up for the workshop and then walked away and left it.
All right. Well, this has been really informative. It's top of the hour. We went the distance. The questions were fabulous. So thanks to everybody who participated asking questions. Mike's recording is still available, so you can see it on the Guild site if you want to pick up on it. And always, Mike's extremely available and accessible, so I'm sure he'd field any questions you have beyond our conversation today. Mike, thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to join us and sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure. Thanks for everybody for spending some time with us today.
All right. Take care, everybody. Stay healthy. Wash your hands. All that good stuff.
Have a great weekend.